friends, Zig coming in at the top. Today on the show we have Henry Frayne from the band Lanterna. You might be familiar with some of Henry's other work, such as The Moon Seven Times, Ack-Ack, The Syndicate, that's kind of old one, but you might know it. Lanterna has a new record coming out, Hidden Drives. It comes out June 4th. We're going to listen to a song from it in a little bit. It'll be on all the streaming platforms, wherever you get your music. Henry was a cool guy. This was a thoughtful conversation. It's interesting because music that has more space to it, which sounds like it'd be easier to make, is actually kind of the opposite. Henry gets into those challenges of recreating this music live within the interview, and with a rotating cast of musicians, it keeps that challenge fresh in a good, bad way, maybe. But this interview starts off with a question about a road, Buttermilk Lane, which was the inspiration, or at least the place where a lot of forethought for this record came out. Personally, I find driving with the right amount of coffee, those ideas come out, right? When you have nothing to worry about except for where you're going and you're in the moment, it's a meditative thing, right? You're not worried about having to do anything else. You're doing it. You're going somewhere. You're either listening to something or the cord broke and you can hear nothing, so you're just thinking. It's almost like a shower or a place where you're doing something that requires no thought, that allows some of those like creative ideas to pop out. And I think this record reflects that. So what we're going to do is we're going to listen to a track. Here is Hidden Drives off Hidden Drives by Lanterna. Hidden Drives off Hidden Drives. Before we get to our interview, this podcast is mixed by Studio 44 CLE or Studio 44 Cleveland. If you have any audio, visual, or streamed needs, go to Studio 44 Cleveland on Facebook or studio44cleveland@gmail.com. Write to Jay Sparrow, and he'll make your stuff sound rad. Also, if you can like, rate, subscribe, and review the podcast on all the podcast platforms. And we have the social medias. If you can give us a like there, that helps me keep talking to cool people like Henry and sharing those insights with you. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Henry. It's all good. Appreciate it. All right. So if you're ready to jump in, I'm good.
Yeah.
Okay. Tell me about Buttermilk Lane.
It is a winding road that does link Route 1, which is that main small two-way highway that goes from Florida to Maine, and it's near Rockland, Thomaston. Is Route 1 passes by Thomaston, Maine, and there's an enormous cement plant. I think it's Dragon Cement, and they, a huge quarry on either side of Route 1. There is a connecting road called Buttermilk Lane, which does go south from Route 1 before it gets to these two large towns and heads off towards the St. George Peninsula, which kind of snakes down to the south. And this is all along Penobscot Bay in the mid-coast of Maine. And so I have often wondered sort of why someone decided to there are other ways to get to the St. George Peninsula from Rockland going south on a pretty nice road all the way down to what is that lighthouse from the film with Tom Hanks where he runs from one end of the country to the other.
Oh, Forrest Gump.
Yeah. So there is a lighthouse at I believe, the southern end of the St. George Peninsula. On Penobscot Bay, that is, easier way to get there. So Buttermilk Lane just sort of does connect Route 1 to this other highway that goes to the south, and it really does dip down into a very low. It is a wetland area that sort of feeds the Westgig River, which feeds into Penobscot Bay, but it's always a strange. In Maine, I try to wonder when people decided, we really need to add a road here, or this is a great idea for a road. And it does.
Yeah.
I think Buttermilk Lane is because it bounces around quite a bit and back and forth, winding highways and winding hidden drives and all sorts of things.
So now driving down this is where the new Lanterna album kind of formed or started to become clear. Some of these songs, driving and like kind of taking all this in.
Yeah, and I kind of I stayed somewhat in the interior of Maine, maybe 20, 30 miles in, and also my parents have um, a cabin
Okay.
on the ocean, St. George Peninsula. So just I do commute back and forth, and Buttermilk Lane is one of the 5-10 minutes of the half-hour journey is on Buttermilk Lane, and it's just it's where there are quite a few signs. Road signs that say hidden drives, and it just kind of started to link to the song as I was listening to these mixes and song ideas over the couple year period, and decided that it was a great
Yeah.
title for an album.
Yeah. No, especially I got the Vance of the record and make the album. All these albums have this space. I don't know how you create this space, but there's a space to each tune, and like I putting the title on it kind of gives that envision of maybe what you were seeing while making it and where this space is kind of being captured. And like a Hidden Drive it's got like a very major major tonality, maybe more so than some of the previous records. Is there like a did that come out, do you think? Is it the tonality of some of these sites you were seeing more like I don't know what I'm trying to go with this, but I noticed like there's a lot of like a major tonalities in this one.
And you mean major to minor, or
Yeah,
just?
it just sounded like overall I was getting like this is kind of in a major key, I think, as opposed to like B minor, right? Which it's kind of on the tip of the tongue. That one's in B minor.
Yeah. So I hadn't really thought about it. Just looking at, I'm pretty sure there are quite a few uh, major, songs in a major key. I mean, I do chart my songs and put um, chord charts, chord stamps, and all that sort of stuff. But as far as reading music and sight reading, I don't do that at all. So I guess I hadn't really. I generally do grab the chords and start recording, and then you know chart verse chorus, and kind of hadn't really thought about that. But I have friends and people in the past have mentioned this is a very major song or a minor song, and it I would say that yes, this album did have happen to have just some more of the major tone to it, major uh, scale and such in some of the songs, and that just happened because of the songs that kind of floated to the top. And
Mm.
for this album, I did have a few years ago kind of got all the song sketches together, and it may have been 20 or 30 songs. So sort of these were the ones that kind of uh, all got finished at about the same time, and it was like, okay, that seems like a good album. And from the past, when in the 90s, I noticed it seemed like everyone was trying to fill up a CD, or at least I was with the bands I was in. And it kind of, now when we get to the vinyl era, it does kind of say, well, how do you side a vinyl that's 70 minutes long? That's like
Yeah.
one and a half sides, or that's three sides of an album. What do you do with the fourth side? So I'm it seems like a good idea. Starting with a couple years ago with Highways, I think was a 9 song album, and then a 10 song album seemed to be that's perfect. 5 songs aside, if you do vinyl, and um,
At the time before the Beatles, American bands would put out albums with 12 songs, so you have 6 on each, right? and the Beatles would do 14, so you have 7 on each, and then that became the standard, was to do 14 songs. And I was like, I never thought of it like that. But like when you start to think of some of the physicality of capturing this space and putting it on something physical, then you got to like put that into perspective. Um, but like, so a lot of these tunes you track. How does like a composition come about? Because like I read that you take a lot of these progressions and you write them down and you have a lot of cassettes floating around you, like it just little storage bits. Are you recording like, because are you recording melody lines or like chord progressions?
It's probably both, but I always sort of try and um, I've found that you turn on your equipment, sit down, there's an echo or a reverb. The first chord you grab is like you know can really lead to something. It just
Mm.
so many songs just like, oh, that's interesting. There's one open note, there's a B ringing there, and I can change the bass with my thumb. So a lot of these are, although it's not going to be the final uh, way that I write something or record something, but at that beginning stage, it does have something to do with can I play this all with just one guitar and
Mm.
with moving the bass around and using some drone notes so that there's an open A here or a low E there, and then I can do a little melody. So I guess it would be chords and melody, although in the multi-tracking phase, you can sort of do all that separately. However, ironically, it does come back to the me being somewhat uh, on a budget as a band,
Yeah.
a solo artist. Working with Eric Jabot, a drummer from Chicago. Um, I do end up trying to, if I do play live shows now and then, it is me trying to create that all at once. So ironically, how the songs begin, or sort of how they get to their live stage of can I do this all just with my own fingers on a six-string guitar. But in the mid '90s, I was playing guitar with the Moon Seven Times here in Champaign, and I did really want to be able to uh, kind of when jamming with the band, I did want to be able to, or on my own, be able to move the bass line, and play, more chords. So I did buy one of the Roland PK5s, which is the just MIDI pedals, and I bought a
Oh,
vintage
okay.
keys by the one of the synth makers, and so suddenly I was able to sort of just play drone notes and then play chords that didn't necessarily have all the bass notes right there. So that was all of what 25 years ago. It was a wonderful sort of thing, and a lot of songs on Hidden Drives definitely came from that. Being able to just sort of play bass notes and sort of jam with a drummer or on my own and play play chords, and it sort of expanded my ability to kind of um, get more out of the bass lines or the chords and melodies that I was playing.
It's beautiful. It's a beautiful like circle, right? Of it starts, how it starts is how the end product ends up being. And it's interesting with a lot of bands. There's that whole like, you write the song one way, you record it like all with all the bells and whistles because you're in the studio and you can do that. And when it's live, there's a more real approach to it. Do you do like a lot of looping?
No, I don't at all. And
Wow.
I
Okay.
have had some friends who definitely have looping pedals
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
but I just it's something I should. It's just I haven't taken that technical step just because I'm still kind of working through this, and I don't know in my lifetime if I'll ever get to the point of okay, I'm done working this way, and I looping would really. And I think that at some point I should check it out because it could really some of the things I'd like to do live would probably be, perfect for that kind of being able to play over certain simple parts. So
Right.
yes, it's something that is probably long overdue, and I've had someone particularly ask me, like, you should really, check out looping.
Well, what you can do without the looping pedal, like the compositions you have with hidden drives, is like they're all beautiful, and if you're doing that without it, like with that like extra support, you know what I mean? Like you can go double that. But it's amazing. That's amazing. You have this and I get it. It's what you've learned how to write with. So that's why you can do it the best you can, and that's why it sounds as good as it does, because that's how you learned how to do it. Um, but I'm sorry, I thought did I cut you off?
Oh, I was just going to say there was a at some point was trying to think live of all sorts of ways that I could do something more than the guitar sound and possibly looping, but also having the bass line. And for the last record, Backyards, in 2015, I uh, did get together with Eric Jabot, the drummer who's recorded with me for several records, not Backyards, since he was in Japan with his the Blue
Whoa.
Man group there
Oh yeah.
uh,
Okay.
for
Wow.
several years. And Louis Simon played drums on the Backyards record, but he's not in the Midwest. So for this latest record, Eric Jabot was back from Japan, and he did play drums on this Hidden Drives record. And so uh, he was back in 2015 as well. And so he did play some live shows with me, and we played a few on the East Coast. And I've always been trying to figure out ways to, if there's another thing I could do to have more sounds triggering, and I did had a cousin who had a set of the Roland PK5s, and I did end up, buying them from him, and I've had those sitting around, thinking that maybe, in the course of playing a song with the drummer Eric Jabot, could somehow, have those pedals and just sort of, hit a note that would trigger some sort of keyboard sound that would sort of develop over a couple of notes. But I have not gotten to that stage yet, but it would be nice to be able to do that sort of thing. The other thing is, just as we were starting a couple of dates on the East Coast in 2015, he flew out to Boston, and I met him there with his drums, and I had my stuff. And the night before playing a couple of shows, he said, I could really, I do have this earpiece, and I do have this little sampler box or something that he can play to a click track, basically.
Huh.
Uh,
Okay.
and so he said, if you have your delay times, why don't you just figure out the tempo with those delay times, and going into a whole different section of my different kind of delay times. As you notice, I sometimes play off of the different beats, and I can never really quite remember if it's a dotted eighth note or if it's a quarter note delay, but it just seems to feel right. And whichever song it is, it kind of feels right if I'm playing to that clicky delay or the
Gotcha.
delay that's more of the. And so uh, just this 2015 small tour, he said, well, yeah, sure. And so he, in his earpiece, which he's used to playing to a click track all the time, he for the shows, sort of for the first time playing with a drummer who's on a click track. So my delays were, like right on, because generally over the years I've just sort of kind of clicked at the beginning and got in time with the drummer, and then we'd play a song, and the delays would kind of be what they were, and it's not always
Yeah, that could.
sort of I sort of float and all of that. But it was kind of interesting to actually end this out. Of course, didn't happen when we were rehearsing, but it was the night before the show. He was like, oh yeah, I can do this fine, I'll just type in my tempos, and you'll be. And it was interesting to suddenly really get on beat with a song, some older songs like Brightness or B minor you mentioned, to
Yeah.
really have those kind of click back feedback envelope type delays that were just like perfectly in sync. So that was a different experience to finally kind of do that. And I know click tracks and all that sort of thing are very old technology, but it was kind of fun to do that.
But they're efficient. You know what I mean? Like, I was wondering live, how is this done? Like, I know live everything gets changed a bit, but there's such an atmospheric soundscape, sonic soundscape with your music. How, live, you got to find a way to be able to do that. And with a drum, like in a lot, how you point out, a lot of delays do have like a tempo at the beginning of it. So I was like, maybe that's it. But that makes sense. And like, I bet that had to be like awesome to have like a drummer that has a click now. Now like we're in it. We're gonna do great tonight and tomorrow night. Like,
Yeah, it really it was kind of a fun. I thought of actually kind of. Um, known some drummers. There's a drummer here in Champaign who talked about he was out in L.A. and he worked with a guy who did sort of a solo show with a drummer, and he had all his all the songs were basically on a click track, but there was also a guide track, and this may be real common knowledge to sorts of bands that do this sort of thing, but his the click track that this guy had who hired drummers basically had fill coming up in four measures or four beats, and change to chorus and all that sort of descriptive stuff. So that, I mean, sometimes the problem that I do, especially working with anyone that's not me is sort of like, of course, I basically know how Silent Hills from the first Lanterna record goes, or how B minor goes, or how many times I do this. There are no, you're just sort of in B minor, you play that chord progression four times, then you go to that middle section with the E minor, and then you come back, and then there's a pause, and then back into the next, what I call verse. But it it can be somewhat. I would think it is somewhat like, well, how many times? I mean, for a drummer, it's just like just keep playing the beat, but there are major changes that do come up that need to where the beat changes
right.
and things like that. Or playing with a bass player when I've gone to Greece. I have a friend, Nikos, and a drummer named Billy, who I did do some shows with 10 years ago. And so without the vocals, without those sort of key um, lines or cues, it is somewhat difficult. And so I do find myself sort of moving in the same way when we're about to come up to a change, sort of turning slightly or lifting my guitar, or acting like there's some big dramatic change, so that maybe the people I'm playing with will kind of look and say, "Oh yeah, Henry's
Here it
about to
is.
change." Yeah, because yeah, when I do, and I do have to kind of get myself to when I'm playing these songs to somehow remember that, yes, I'm supposed to change in four measures. There is a change coming, and we pause, or and so that's somewhat uh, because there's a lack of vocal or a lack of cues. And
Right.
the other thing, as you mentioned, some of these songs, yes, it is tough because in the multi-tracking world there is an ability to add those sort of melody lines in the background, and sort of things going on as well. So just one guitar, I try to do um, the chords on the lower end, and then hopefully do some high notes and some ringing notes, um, and I haven't gotten too much into alternate tuning since I pretty much travel with just one guitar, although I should have a backup with me. Um, it is
Living dangerously.
exactly. I mean, with a when you especially going to Greece, there's
Right.
no way I was gonna bring two guitars, but I could always have one on stage. But just there's kind of that like, oh, I broke a string, and I haven't broken a string on stage in years, and it would just be like, whoa, okay, now I need to change strings quickly. Um,
No pressure.
and
It's I
yeah,
put it on right. I didn't put it on backwards. How's it going, everybody? Like, that's the worst.
yeah.
um, how was Greece? What was it like playing over there?
It was really. a really special experience. I'd sort of um, put off going to Greece for so many years. I mean, I'd had just a couple of opportunities to go to Europe in since the 80s, and it. I when I was in the Moon Seven Times, I happened to make a trip when our first record came out in '93, and I kind of the record company was had an office in New York, but they also had London and Amsterdam offices. So I did sort of travel around a little bit, just as a member of the band, kind of visiting, and I did have an opportunity. Either I can go to Greece, I can get a flight to Greece, or I can go to Finland. And for some reason, I went to Finland, and so I
Both sound
missed.
cool.
Yeah, it was definitely glad I did, but it kept me from going to Greece until 2005. And in 2004, you mentioned the song B Minor, which is from the Elm Street record, the first record that came out on Bad Man, the second
Right.
of the Lanterna records. And yeah, I can sort of say, that Elm Street record was, somewhat popular in Greece, or, I mean, I can say that, but it sort of, I found that, when I went there, that people actually did kind of know that record or knew the song B Minor. And
That's sick.
I don't know if
Yeah.
they were just sort of like, oh yeah, this guy from America, of course we're going to say we know his music, but it for whatever distribution, it seemed like Badman really had there was some sort of either airplay or some of the radio shows in Athens or other cities. There had been some play. So in 2004, my friend this someone Nikos emailed me and said, I'm putting together a club on the Peloponnesus in a town called Astros, and I'm still remodeling this what used to be a shelter called, in Greek, it's kataphygio, is a shelter. It's where people sheltered during various times in
Yeah.
history. And so he's still working on the club, but he said, next year, 2005, I'd love to invite you to come and play 2 shows at the club here in Astros. And so I was like, oh, sure, can hopefully figure that out with my, regular job at a public radio station. And, it was the summertime, so I was able to, schedule it and, go over and spend some time there. And it was the start of kind of about 8 trips over there in the next 5 years. And so it was a real,
Wow.
uh,
Yeah.
definitely great experience playing in that sort of completely different world from Champaign-Urbana,
Right.
Illinois,
Right.
Midwest, and especially the summertime, some winter time. But the just the ability or to be able to play and have people come out, who just seem to come out when a band plays a show. As opposed to sometimes in the Midwest, it is difficult to kind of get audiences to come out on certain nights, or if it's not quite the bill that they want to see, or if I don't play that often, so it's hard to know what kind of draw there will
Right.
be.
Right. No, it's a completely different set of challenges. It's okay. We got the gig, but it's a Tuesday night, and I don't think they're going to hire us for the Friday because it's a Tuesday night. We can't bring that many people on Tuesday. It's a whole different mentality. But that's interesting. Like, I have a friend who plays bouzouki, and he goes to Greece every like year, and Greek music is really interesting, and it's interesting that they like because it's all in like a lot of it's in like 9/8, very like Middle Eastern influence. Did any of that kind of like influence um, the space you capture in your music? Like the idea of playing off a drone is a very kind of Eastern like um, idea, like as far as like making a melody off one note type deal.
I think the I was working on one of the record that came out, Desert Ocean, in 2006.
Yeah.
So I was sort of finishing that up when I got back from my first Greek trip, and sort of definitely kind of just that whole experience traveling through Italy and then to Greece did, kind of put a new light on the songs that I was finishing up at that time. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So it's interesting. Like, did this hearing a whole like sonic scape like you make did like kind of looking at your career building up to it, like working with a band like Ack-Ack, right? Um, that has its own space too. Like, where did this kind of like where did that come from? Like, where do you can you trace a point where you're like were drawn to a sound that was a bit more fuller than maybe just a guitar coming out of an amp, you know?
Yeah, um, I saw an ad for Ack-Ack was looking for a guitarist. Just in 1984, they were starting to play live more, and so I did see an ad and answered it and went and tried out. And I think right at that time I had um, picked up a Memory Man, what is
Oh, okay.
electro harmonics,
Yeah, yeah.
and so it was just starting to. And so when I kind of tried out, or started to integrate into that band, when they asked me to join, is definitely the band was kind of formed. They had formed it around group composition, where everyone kind of has input and they write. We in that band, it was like a year and a half, 2 years. It was just like, I was in college at the time, but we rehearsed like 5 nights a week, or it was
Damn.
just constantly
Yeah.
writing. And so I would say that was the first experience of, even though those songs were upbeat and sort of very vocal
Right.
based.
Compared.
um, I definitely did start to learn about chords and writing with other people, but sort of making uh, putting my sound in, with the bass guitar and the synthesizer and the drums, and sort of especially with Joe Strell, the bass player. I would just be able to sort of play, a couple of notes in succession, and he would sort of change the bass around that so that it would, even though I was just playing the same notes over and over, his his bass lines and the keyboard lines would sort of change them or make them sound uh, much different, or give a different angle to them.
That it's interesting that like they as a band from the rip that wants everyone to write. Like a lot of times I feel like a lot of bands are like one guy wrote the thing and we make it together type deal. So it's interesting that that was kind of like a common practice for the group. Is like everyone had to find a way to write their way into it. Is that kind of what started? Like, is that where you started writing? Was with Ack-Ack and onward, or were you writing before?
Um, no, that was pretty much it. I'd back in uh, high school, I was in a high school band, the Syndicate,
Okay,
and did have a couple of songs. It was just the beginning writing phase, and so it really wasn't until I joined Ack-Ack that I did. We're writing all the time. Every rehearsal is either rehearsing for a show or a writing session. And I would say, I always think to myself when I talk to them, I wish they would have given me the instructional video on what group composition is, because I remember, I mean, the band was sort of formed. Ack-Ack was formed, sort of as this sort of experiment in group composition, and for the first year or two, they just kind of um, rehearsed in this railway hotel right by the railroad tracks in downtown Champaign, and which was the apartment, this very narrow apartment building, sort of built onto the side of another building, was became known as the Ack-Ack Hotel, because there were
that's awesome.
um, so many members of the band, not myself, lived there, but also other bands. A band called the Breeders, which was from Champaign, not the
The other
the
breeders,
Breeders.
but
Um, but they were in the mid '80s. There was a band called the Breeders with a single called Zen Punk was there. So all sorts of bands lived in this apartment block, and it's definitely music all the time and bands rehearsing all the time, similar to just a practice studio
right.
in downtown Chicago or something. But back in those days, it was quite you'd walk in and just there'd be music coming from everywhere. And so it was definitely with Ack-Ack that I sort of started to do that composition. It was somewhat difficult because we didn't have I saw someone today, um, someone who's building amplifiers in Chicago,
Yeah.
had a picture of his design room, and he had a dry erase board there, and he was like, that was the most brilliant thing I've ever come up with, having that board for orders coming in, orders going out, what I'm working on. And so Ack-Ack, to get back to Ack-Ack, we didn't have any sort of board. It was all just sort of like, well, how many times are we doing this, and what are you calling one part and what am I
Yeah.
calling one part? And so it was an interesting cauldron as we all sort of uh, pushed and pulled. And I wish, I had sort of like, gee, I really wanted the song to turn out this way. It's just like, well, that's not what,
Where it
this
went.
is about. But everyone sort of, gave and took, and, finally kind of got to a, this is the final arrangement.
It sounds like that would be either super efficient and nice group collective activity, but I bet it wasn't a lot of the times. I bet there was some headbutting going on because there was nowhere to
Certainly.
at certain times. Having that board makes it clear, though. It's a good point.
Yeah, I often wonder why didn't we, it's just this sort of, maybe it was uh, all theory, or just has to be in your head. And so as I was moving through working with Ack-Ack, we were approached by a small local record company run by Steve Jones, and is in a band with uh, he and another gentleman were a band called The Arms of Someone New, which was a sort
Okay.
of a recording project, never played live, but they put out a single, an album, and then another album. And in the summer of '85, they approached us and said, hey, we've come to a couple of shows, and we've just put out Arms of Someone New albums. But we want to put out, an Ack-Ack single. And so we put out a single and then a 12-inch 3-song single, and got to start working with them, which eventually led to Steve Jones and the keyboardist from Ack-Ack, Lynn Canfield. He had her sing on some synthesizer pieces he was working on, and
Mm.
they asked me to play some guitar, and then uh, in the future they sort of formed a band called Area, which is, I would
Okay.
say, getting to, when I started to kind of play in a more fuller style, or definitely maybe with drum machine, or maybe more songs without drums, was definitely when I started kind of composing songs to bring into the band Area, and have Lynn Canfield put on vocals or work on the keyboardist's ideas.
And like working, so from moving out of like the kind of getting stuff out, Ack-Ack, well, which is Ack-Ack, which is like one ack away from being like that Minuteman tune. Was that anything to do with Ack-Ack, or just happened to be Ack-Ack?
I think the first guitarist, Tim Stevens, just opened up a dictionary and
Oh, okay.
put down his finger, and I think that's how Ack-Ack was, the name was arrived at.
All right, didn't go too far, not too far into the dictionary. Um,
Yeah.
but so from getting these kind of like writing chops out of the way and then moving into Area, was there like when you came in with like the idea of going more vast with your sonic a reach, was there something that just clicked that this is right, or this is what I've been trying to get at with like a group like Ack-Ack? And like, because I found a few of the singles on the Googles with Ack-Ack, and like there's space to it. Like it's like a, even though it's more like it's not as like flowy as like the Moon Seven Times. You know, there's still this atmospheric point to it, and like so I couldn't find anything on Area, but like is that where it started to like was that something you were trying to get out of Ack-Ack? Or like I'm always interested in where this like idea of like capturing the space come from, like because when you hear something like that, it had to have come from something before.
I guess, I mean, the uh, Ack-Ack, although they had been, just a living room project for almost 2 years, they suddenly, when I joined, they uh, just started to book more shows, and then, we
Yeah.
really turned into kind of a live band. So there was a sort of a the ride of, these songs are going to be performed live, and there was a, sort of like a hidden drives, just that kind of the sense of speed, and
Right.
it's sort of somewhat out of control sometimes, but there was a lot of the songs were obviously more of a rock band kind of feel. So with Area, um, just was kind of working on my own. I'd just gotten a Tascam 4 track, and
Okay.
so I did, I would just put for the first Area tape and the first album, I kind of put some, songs on a 4 track, and then uh, gave the tape to Steve Jones, and, thinking, oh, we'll work this up into something, we'll arrange it. And, for a number of the songs from the first uh, batch of Area songs, it was just like, oh, that sounds great. I put it onto my 8 track, and Lynn did vocals on it, and here it is. And so there was just this very almost experimental, or just like whatever I was going to give him. Generally we weren't going to re-record it. It was just whatever I gave him, and those were sort of guitar ideas, or in some cases I meant him to put it into his Tascam 4 track, which runs at 3 3/4, and instead he put
Oh.
it into his cassette machine, and so he dropped it down a whole octave. And so there are a couple of there's one specific
Yeah.
Area song that is just completely sort of um, flowing tones and low bass kind of strings and things, and that's just the I I told him to put it into his Tascam at the higher speed, but and so that song just became uh, a Lynn sang over that, and so was what it was. So it was a project, just like who knows what's going to happen. It's much more kind of a see what works.
That's that's funny. It's crazy, like the accidents like that that make the whole thing different, and you build off of that. The paranoids, like of the batch of tunes, the kind of
Yeah,
almost throwaway ideas that become a whole thing. Um,
yeah,
so your dad taught you how to use tape machines, right?
yes.
And like, is that kind of what I mean made this technology appeal? Aside from the fact that to track stuff, that's what you used.
Yeah, I I did. I don't know if all tape machines. My dad had bought a Revox
Okay.
1/4 inch machine, and on the little dial for each channel, they did allow you that 2 to 1 or 1 to 2. You were able to bounce, sort of. Bounce to the other channel while you were adding something, so you could bounce back and forth, and you could also create echo effects with the same thing. And I never, uh, in the early '80s, I did sort of get to use it quite a bit more, and sort of bouncing back and forth. And so it's kind of strange that it took me until 1986 to buy a 4 track machine. And I wish I would have, when I moved up to the Tascam 8 track 1/2 inch, I sort of got rid of my 4 track, which I kind of regretted. And when they were still making them in the late '90s, I did buy one again. But there was something just so wonderful about having a couple of tracks to multi-track on. And I honestly, I still, um, I have been working at a studio, so I really haven't gotten my digital home system up and running
Yeah.
in any real way. I'm still um, kind of planning to with a new computer and such. I hope to kind of finally start to do some overdubbing or things at home here. And I've, a few minutes ago, I did want to mention that I do record with Mike Brosco and have since about I guess it was 2002, and he has a studio. He had a studio in Champaign, and then he moved out to Muhammad, which is nearby, and now he's moving back to Champaign with his studio.
What's it called?
But
What's the studio?
Waterworks Audio,
Gotcha. Okay.
and as I said, someone recommended him after I'd done the Sands album in 2002. I was sort of trying to figure out how to get you know uh, get working with a drummer again. For the Sands record, I did work with a friend, and we just did some beats on a Roland thing, and so the Sands record was definitely kind of a home studio record, and as well as the first Lanterna record was definitely drums recorded at home on an 8-track and overdubbed and all that. So I in 2003 I did want to kind of start uh, get a sound
Right.
with a drummer. And so when you mentioned the spaces and of some of the songs on the new record or other records, Mike Brosco definitely has been, he likes to kind of manipulate sound and work with all of the, if I just, kind of record a guitar part where he's going to kind of take some pieces here and there and run it through a delay. And that's really sort of what adds a lot of the space to some of the
Okay.
last
Okay.
4 records that he's worked on with me. So, and it's it's almost been 19 years now that he and I have been working together, and so it's been really enjoy having someone to kind of just uh, basically know what it's supposed to sound like, and kind of add his own stamp as a producer and an engineer, and it's really fun to work with him.
And just having someone that you can depend upon getting your vision out. Yeah, I think that's really like when you're recording anything, it's even when you're doing it by yourself and you show it to someone else, there's that immediate like trust to show someone to get that first honest opinion. And like if you're unless you're in a studio working with someone that gives you that feedback right away. But but I think that relationship is equally as important as say the between the drummer and bass player or whatever, like or another person within the band, because that's the final like kind of say, well, that was the take or do it again. Um, and also to kind of touch upon like uh, using the tape deck, having only is there's like a thing to limited choices. Like I feel like if there's a limited amount of what you can put on it, what you put on it is going to matter more so than adding a bunch of extra stuff that you don't need. So having less and being able to be more creative in a more refined, smaller space leads to a better output, I think.
Yeah, um, and I mean, one would think that well, we have 24 tracks now, or we have um, I mean, I guess just there is a limit to just how much information you can eventually
Process, yeah.
mix down. So I am sort of amazed at some of the 8-track recordings that it's like 3 tracks of drums, bass guitar, 2 guitars, and then with Lanterna you don't have to worry about vocals usually. So there are other, but I'm surprised looking over some of the old tracks. It's like, oh, we only use 7 tracks, or there are only 6 here, or
Huh.
there's only
Yeah.
we only used 4. So it is, it's all about kind of the mix down and how you process the tracks and such. So you don't necessarily need many more, but there is something very um, basic about just having a couple of tracks to work with, and something I never really did much of, but the mixing down and then bouncing back a stereo mix onto, and then adding more tracks, does make you force you to make decisions about, okay, this is how the drums, bass, and basic guitar are all gonna fit in the mix, and then we're gonna add stuff on top of that. And you mentioned, Beatles records and all those sorts of things. They were always doing those sorts of bouncing and
Right.
pre-mixing, and you just have to. It does. I've heard hearing producers talk about such things. You it becomes obvious that it is a very creative part of it, because you've decided that's how that's going to sound like. So everything you do after that is responding to the way that the drums and the bass and guitar, basic guitar sound, and you're really you're basically cutting new tracks or final vocal tracks to the final mix of the basic tracks. And that's different from, we're just going to do everything on 24 tracks, and you might be cutting vocals to scratch guitar because the guitar hasn't been put down yet. So that's a very classic, that's why some of those records do sound the way they do, I would think.
Definitely, definitely, because once they're bounced down, on tape, that's as loud as it's gonna get. You know what I mean? That's the drum mix to some degree.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but that okay. So like, when did like was kind of taking a step backwards? Your dad was showing you how to like do the um um. I lost my train of thought, but using how to use a tape machine and take one thing and bounce it to another. When did guitar get in your hand? When was like guitar your mode of expression? Was there like did your dad play guitar too? Was there like um what brought you to the guitar?
I think it was a friend's dad had a Yamaha acoustic, Sunburst, which he, for some reason, he was very, no brands kind of guy, and he was also a woodworker, and built pipe organs or installed pipe organs maybe into churches and things.
That's
Um,
cool.
he had he had taken off the Yamaha from the guitar and sort of refinished it, so it was a guitar um, with no label on it. But I remember, coming up into just before my freshman year of high school, I think, there was this guitar, and maybe traveling to a music store and sort of looking at the guitars, and just it, there's that. Perhaps everyone has that feeling. Well, oh, this isn't my thing because I have a friend who does that, and
Right.
that's his thing. Or
Yeah.
it just didn't really occur to me in being around my friend's guitar or going to the music shops that, like, maybe I could be a guitarist. Although I was very very much into music at that time, of the things you'd be listening to as a 13-year-old in 1978. And so it didn't occur to me until, and uh, I've sort of mentioned this enough times, but I, my friends certainly know that it was after going to, there was a Foreigner concert here in
Yeah.
Champaign at the Assembly Hall, the big arena, and just I'd seen Boston a few weeks before, and then there was this concert, and there would be other concerts that freshman year. But it was definitely in the fall of '78. I was just like, after that concert, just for some reason, I was like, I just have to call and get guitar lessons and you know, try and see, if I can learn how to play guitar. And it was definitely an experience that just uh, sent me on my way. The Interestingly, I mean, I wouldn't hear that the first King Crimson record for a couple of years, but it was kind of funny to see a Foreigner concert with Ian McDonald playing, guitar, but also he did this tremendous flute solo in the middle of one of the Foreigner songs, Star
Huh.
Rider.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so it was just this, uh, King Crimson. With King Crimson, he did one U.S. tour that the band sort of fell apart, I believe, at the end of it in '69, and so it was kind of fun to be able to see him performing with a band that was really riding high, and
Right, right.
to have a band that had a flute solo section of a concert at Assembly Hall, where there are usually basketball games and and monster truck rallies.
That that's a wow. But like it's interesting. Foreigner, and Boston. They're Foreigner's greatest hits, and Boston. The first record were my first two CDs I was begifted, and
Wow.
right, and it's like those are two like even though they are kind of poppy compared to King Crimson, they still kick. You know what I mean? Like Boston, they rip on that. I'm trying to think of the guitar player from Foreigner, Mick Jones. I think that's his name.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Because I would always mix him up with because he's the same guy from the Clash. That
Yeah.
rips too. I mean, there was something to writing a song like that and being able to deliver it, and like, but that's it. That once you see it's possible and see what that thing can do. So after that, you got the guitar and you started taking the lessons, and did it click? It just
Yeah, I was certainly sort of uh, first it was a rented nylon string guitar, but then I did somehow had enough money from a newspaper route to get a Lotus
nice.
Les Paul copy,
Yeah,
and a crate amplifier, and it was sort of the long road to starting to buy new or better, trying to search for that perfect sound. Um, and my guitar teacher was somewhat of a jazz guy, and so I someone asked me recently, well, did that influence you somehow? The sort of expanded chords he was trying to teach you, because I would kind of bring in a song I wanted to learn how to play, and it would be some sort of rock song, and he'd be like, okay, let's go through this, and yes, it's the G, and then but he there was also that influence of the jazz chords, and things that I do still know to put in here or there. I think he taught me an appreciation of those, and sort of adding this sort of theory, a little bit of theory to
right.
my guitar lessons and things.
I think yeah, with theory, it's like there's like players theory, and there's like compositional theory, and I mean, there's music theory in one, but if I had to come up with like two weird categories to kind of explain it, and it seems like players theory is just enough that when you come across a minor seven flat five or something, you're like, oh, that's going somewhere. You know what I mean? Like the idea of how to play over certain things. Where like compositional theory, it would be like writing 4 part like voicings, and once you get to a dominant, the middle must resolve down. It becomes way more structured and less
Hmm.
not playing. You're not playing with it, but those little tricks and tips really. I don't know what your guitar teacher taught you, but like the few that my guitar teacher taught me, when you run into that chord or that situation and you remember that one little bit, it pays off.
Yeah.
That's a so it kind of, and with jazz too, there's like the Coltrane and like the Miles Davis like kind of approach with that in a weird way, like kind of that vastness too, right? Like when you got the modal I can talk today, the modal movements of like So What or Impressions by um Miles and Coltrane. Like there's that like kind of space that's built up and letting one note ring and letting that resolve and have like that note last as long as it needs to last. Like there's something to that type of improv that I think pays off in all forms of music. Or maybe not pays off, but like makes more makes more of a musical choice by letting certain things breathe. And I feel like with a lot of your compositions, there's breath to it. Um, is that a kind of compositional tool you think about? Do you have any other compositional tools that you, aside from like kind of building off like a rhythmic delay, um, that you find yourself using in this right this recent release of Hidden Drives?
Yeah, I mean, it is, I don't know how to say that, I really generally don't know, what, what happens when that note pops out there, or, only that I kind of like it, and that's the way it should be. But I've,
Right.
going back several decades, I might have thought to myself, gee, I should try and understand some of this, or since I do work for a university, I could be feasibly take some courses and learn some of these things. And that just there comes a time when you're like, that's never going to happen. I'm just going to keep doing
Yeah.
what I'm doing and
Yeah.
hope. So I mean, there's in some ways, you're at a certain level of making music. You're not, if you play it to someone who really understands theory and things, it's like, well, in this in the song, you're just playing two chords over and over again, but you're slightly changing you're adding this note here halfway through,
Right.
and
Right.
it's like, well, yeah, that's true, but
It
it has
still
a beat,
sound.
you can dance to it. So it's so it depends on it all should come down to just what sounds good. And I know a lot of music is just made, originally was just sort of formulated because they weren't really thinking about sort of the technical aspects of it. But
Right. 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 No, I agree with that 100%. Like I don't think like it's theory when you try to describe it. You know what I mean? Like before that it's just something you play because it sounds right for the moment. And like, there's good in both. There's good and bad to like really putting your mental energy into transcribing it or deciding it. Like where, um but the so is that where you did the radio gig at the university?
yeah, University of Illinois, there's a public radio station here affiliated, AM, FM, and television.
Okay.
And
What's your
uh,
show?
um, in the 80s, I kind of got on as a board operator, and
Okay.
so just sort of behind the scenes, tactical, very analog, just running a mixing board and doing um, a good amount of running phone interviews. Had a couple of uh, hour-long interview segments during the day, maybe 3.5 hours actually. So
Whoa.
it'd definitely be. And for some reason, technical director was for some of them. We did it in a studio where the host and the operator were, sitting across from each other, and so it's a sort of as opposed to some interviews where they're in another studio, you're in the
Right.
master control room, you can put your feet back, answer the phone, type in where the calls are coming from. But for some of um, the the other show was, you're sort of great. I get to be quiet for an hour, and someone else is answering the phones in the master control room. So it was definitely a I heard thousands of hours of sort of great minds kind of talking about books and anything.
That's
And
awesome.
they don't we at some point they had them all archived on cassettes, and I don't know if they ever got them all. If anyone's interested, I
Yeah.
mean, there's so much material. I
Right.
did also. Um, I was also working with in another part of the station. We had a jazz show or a live jazz show on Saturday nights, and so in addition to just a someone spinning records, we would go out into the community and record an entire night's 3 sets of jazz, and then my boss would compile it down into a live jazz show, and we did that for most of the 90s until just sort of budget cuts and
Yeah.
the scene and things like that caused us to kind of scale back on that.
That's a sick gig though. Like to be forced to listen to like people who are educated on their topic like yak about it and go see jazz concerts. What a rad. That's I'm sure there was a lot
Yeah,
of not so rad stuff, but that's a cool gig.
yeah, it was a very interesting time, and I really enjoyed. Uh,
Any
uh,
notable interviews that you were part of switching it?
um, no, not really. They're all sort of a blur,
Yeah.
unfortunately. Um, but it was always, and I was completely removed from the uh, the scheduling and all that sort of thing. So it was just pretty much, looking at the schedule, seeing what was going to happen that week. So there's never, I think, I think I sort of traded off with another operator for the master control shift. And so this week, that week. So I don't think that I was on the board when the Focus show
Gotcha.
interviewed George Martin. So I wasn't on
Ah,
the board that day. But
that would have
you
been
always,
cool. Yeah.
at the end of the interview, you always kind of picked up the line, and if they were still there, said, well, thanks for joining us, or here, the producer wants to talk to you, and hand the phone off. But so yeah, I didn't get to talk to George Martin, unfortunately. But they did, they did have some fairly notable people coming through on the mainly phone interviews.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. That's good. And it's kind of serendipical. We're doing it now.
Yeah, yeah.
So to kind of shift gears and go back, when did the Moon Seven Times? Like, when did that project pick up?
So this. It was really kind of an important, an interesting step after the band Ack-Ack to be working with Steve Jones, keyboardist and guy who ran the record company, and Lynn Canfield, who had been the sort of keyboardist and sang a little bit in Ack-Ack. She suddenly sort of started writing songs and lyrics and singing, and Area did a couple of records, and there was a point where sort of Steve Jones moved away from Champaign, and it just sort of Moon Seven Times started to form when Brendan Gamble, who was the drummer who joined Ack-Ack when I was in the band, he had been doing other projects in Champaign, playing in bands, and then we just sort of got back together again and kind of recorded two songs with guitar, sort of the uh, sound that I'd been somewhat playing with Area, with his very intricate kind of beats, or just the way he plays and composes on drums, but also since he plays guitar, keyboards is sort of, I think he brings that to the drumming that he does, so that uh, in the late 80s, we kind of did these two songs, and Lynn Canfield wrote and sang on those, and sort of started to think that we would come up with an album, and it eventually became The Moon Seven Times. And a label in London, Third Mind Records, had licensed one of the Area records from C'est l'Amour, the New Orleans or the Louisiana record company, who had put out a couple of the Area records. And so we got in touch with the London record company, and they were interested, and so we sort of started the process of recording a Moon Seven Times record for them. And by the time, a few years later, that it actually came out, he had been bought by Roadrunner Records, which was sort
Mm,
of a hard rock
yeah.
label from Amsterdam. And uh, so sort of it took some time. We recorded the Moon Seven Times record in 1980, the summer, and because of sort of the purchase of Third Mind Records and his search for a label to take him over, the Moon Seven Times record didn't come out until the spring of 1983. So it was this. It seemed like a very long time back then. It wasn't so long in today's terms, but it really did feel like it took us forever to release that first record, and then we did record a second one fairly quickly.
God, well, yeah, because there would have been the time in between. I mean, it is that was a turnaround. I mean, especially it seems it's really interesting with like all these record companies kind of overseas seeing picking you guys up. Like it's crazy that to be able to manage that type of deal from Illinois, like from Champaign, like. Um, but so right when that came out, you had the second one follow right through.
Yeah, about a year. A year later, we had the second Moon Seven Times record, 7 equals 49, and that one was sort of recorded with all the songs we had sort of put together in those intervening couple of years, kind of
Right.
waiting for things to work out with that first record. But yes, to say something about just being in a small Midwestern town and happening to have Steve Jones and Mel, their office records, and sort of to learn about, hey, there's a record company, or he's got, when I go over to his house, his apartment, there are 10 boxes filled with LPs of their new record, and just the mechanics of actually putting out music, and how it can be quite a risk sometimes
Right.
if how are you going to sell all those records. So I think while I was still in the area, I did make one trip to Europe, and went to London in 1989, and did meet with the guy who ran Third Mind Records out of his flat, and so did get to know him. So it certainly, it seemed like we were kind of just making it up as we went along, but to get interest from the record company overseas, and kind of put that together, and figure out a recording budget and record the record. And then unfortunately, he sort of needed to spend a year or two shopping for a new distributor, and such. So it was quite a positive time, but also sort of a very agonizing time to have a 24 track, recorded on 24 track album, mixed and ready to go, but sort of putting on hold for a couple of years until things came together. So certainly, shopping around in the United States, we didn't have any. We didn't get anyone who was going to say, yes, we believe in the Moon Seven Times, we want to put it out. We were still kind of hoping that Third Mind would find a distributor, which they did in Roadrunner, and then we could put out the record. But in that, as I say, in that year or two, we were free to kind of shop the tapes that we'd made, and and never really found that anyone kind of were like, yes, we're going to do this. Let's put this record out. Since you're free to do it, it's all recorded. Let's go.
I mean, it's amazing that be making that up as you go, and have it pan out, even though like it got dicey. But like with that's incredible. I don't know. Like it seems like now to be able to put something out and like just put your music out there, it seems a lot more easier than going through a company, which even though it's a lot more easier, it's probably less efficient. But because now there's a bigger pool and there's a million things going out and anyone could do it, as opposed to having like kind of a limiter where if you made it in, at least it would be put in front of somebody or put towards someone's. I'm trying to think of I was going to say record player, but I'm not sure if that's the right. It would get to their ears somehow.
Yeah.
So. So yeah, what a racket, man. That's awesome though that it panned out. Like, what was the kind of like the Moon Seven Times? Just the title of that. What is that? Does that mean anything, or is that just like another kind of like?
It it just came with it came from a book, the Golden Bow.
Okay.
And interestingly, we had decided on a band name with Third Mind Records in London was interested. It's basically a label run by just one guy working with PR and such, and distribution and such. But so we were very close with him, and we'd sent him a number of the demos that we were going to record, and we needed to get a contract together. And we the band sort of just finally decided on one name. And I remember we told them the band is going to be called Cobalt. And so sent it off. I don't think the contracts were ever printed up, because he called us and just said, I was looking through the catalog for this sort of techno label, Subway Antler, in Europe, probably a Belgian company. And, I saw that there's a band called Cobalt that put out a 7-inch or a 12-inch, and so we got to get another name. And so
Shit.
I think that did, that did send us to the bookshelf and the Moon Seven Times, something about the moon and, or something about the full moon, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
But in this day and age, I was finally able to go. I haven't, it's an expensive record, but on Discogs, that site, you can find. I finally found this. The Cobalt put out one, I think, 3-song LP, and that's it. And that's what caused us not to be Cobalt, but caused us to be.
Did you get
to
it?
pick a new name. I haven't got it yet because
Okay.
it's $30, but it has an interesting name. Ballet Mécanique or something. It's some sort of techno mix.
Sounds kind of cool. Sounds pretty sick.
Yeah.
Awesome. So writing with the Moon Seven Times, did that kind of so now that you've been composing more with Area, what was it like with the Moon Seven Times? Now that there was more people in it.
Is definitely just as I mentioned, rehearsing in the basement, getting together with Brendan Gamble on drums.
So he was
just
yeah.
He would just there's a song called Straw Donkeys from the first record. It's just, and I had a guitar part with echo that sort of has a nice drone to it, and just immediately the drum pattern that he comes up with, just I guess the whole idea of the first record was just his interplay on the musical level of his interplay with the guitar, and it's just something that I really wanted to explore. And so we were all working at the time, so I'd sort of rehearse with him in the basement and make some cassettes and then give them to singer Lynn Canfield for her to write lyrics and vocal melodies. And so, I mean, I don't know that before we recorded the first record that we actually had our schedule had worked out so that we could actually get together in the basement and run through the songs all. I mean, we may have recorded our first album just by necessity, just sort of cutting the drums, then the guitars, and the vocals, all at different times. And so that was definitely something I wanted to, as I mentioned, as far as my musical ideas, just working with Brendan Gamble, the drummer, was just so important. And, he, being keyboard guitarist, then started, sort of writing ideas, and I would just sort of pretty much, integrate my guitar parts into, or, play his guitar parts. So there's definitely many writers in the band, and bass player Don Gerard also playing a part in writing a lot of the songs. So ironically, the Moon Seven Times was just starting, and in that period that I mentioned, where our label was shopping for a distributor and financing. I did, once again, with Brendan Gamble from the Moon Seven Times, I did sort of decide, I've got these other, pieces, or I want to record this cassette, a 90-minute cassette with just some longer guitar ideas. And I guess I may have had so many songs in my notebook that it was like, well, those aren't Moon Seven Times songs. I'm just going to do something with these other ones. And so, ironically, about 30 years ago, May of '91, I did rehearse some songs with Brendan Gamble on drums, and we did cut sort of the drum tracks and guitar that would be the first Lanterna record. And it was just kind of I think I had the name, but it was just like, record some longer songs. Don't worry about any sort of pop mentality, just sort of get something down. And so we recorded in a couple of days the drums, and I overdubbed, and I put together this kind of 90-minute cassette with a photo booklet and a box set, and that's
That's
what I
cool.
had. So a side project going during the time that I was in the Moon Seven Times, although I didn't record any new music. Ironically, I recorded that cassette box, and then a Greek label wanted to put out 500 records and put out an LP version, and then Parasol Records here in Urbana put out a CD of the first Lanterna group of songs, and then Rykodisc, this sort of CD only label back in the day in the 90s. They licensed it in 1998 and put out another reissue edition, which is now still in the Rhino Records catalog, I guess.
Sick.
Rykodisc became part of Warner Music Group.
Nice. So was Lanterna, was that more freeing having this outlet now? Like compared to writing, sorry, I cut you off.
No, go ahead.
No, compared to like writing for and with a group, was that like a more freeing, like?
Yeah, as I said, I must have had just some ideas or just something uh, that I did want to just kind of a small project. I mean, now that I was hopefully, in a band, Moon Seven Times, that for some reason I, suddenly wanted to do just a little bit more. And I mean, I was definitely still writing with Brendan Gamble on those sort of half of the songs on the first Lanterna record, and Lynn Canfield did write some lyrics for me for one song, and so it was definitely there was a lot of association with the Moon Seven Times, but it was just kind of something to have going, and
Gotcha.
I'm glad I kind of started on it and reissued those first songs a bunch of times in the 90s, and then finally got around to saying, okay, it's been 10 years, I need to do a second record, and I'm glad I kind of got started making new Lanterna records instead of just reissuing the same one over and over.
With the name Lanterna, is that like I mean, what's that? Does that stand for anything? Like, I know I don't know why with all these groups that you're in that the names are so interesting, and I can't put my finger on it.
It is the Italian word for sort of actually, if the uh, uh, Italian word for like a lighthouse or a
Oh,
ship's
okay.
light, or actually there's a song on the new Lanterna record called Cupola, which is sort of those old houses that have those. I don't know why they designed them, but there's a house across the street that has a cupola, just a small windowed room at the top with a weather
Oh,
vane at the top,
yeah,
and
yeah.
so that's kind of that architectural structure. I think is called a lanterna in Italian. I was just speaking to someone earlier in the week, and I think um, the bass player from Ack-Ack was living out in New York, and I think I went out there. He took me to this restaurant called Lanterna, and I was speaking with someone just earlier in the week, and she was like, "Oh, I know that place. I go there all the time. I love that restaurant. It's on Bleecker." Or so I used to think like, "Oh no, they're gonna come get me if I nicked their restaurant's name for my band name." But it 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 seemed to be a nice name. I'd like the it's just a couple letters. It's just one thing, and it is hard. I mean, as we've discussed, choosing
Yeah.
a band name
Right.
is a somewhat tortuous process, and
Definitely.
sometimes you just have to. You do get used to the fact that whatever we choose now, it's like from the last 40 years of experience, it's going to become what we are. So we really don't need to uh, don't need to agonize too much over
Right.
it, do we?
Right.
But yes, we do, because you do have to have the most, that perfect name must be out there. But I'm hoping I don't have to go through that process
You just
too many
gotta.
more times. Although I do hope to. Mike Brosco, my producer of the last 20 years, I have sort of wanted to do a project with him that was somewhat less a side project to my side project. That would be, because I do find, Mike Brosco kind of goes along with me, and it's like, Henry, this one took 5 years, and the one before that took a couple years. Um, he seems to work very fast. He's a guitarist, keyboards, and just knows. I would, sort of think, let's just record 10 songs. I'll come in with some ideas, just drop them off, and you can, work with them. I can re-record them, and then we'll just do something more quickly in the
Yeah.
in the way that most people work these days, where it's somewhat easy to create with all the tools that are available to us.
True. There's definitely some that make it easier. And it's good to have someone that's kicking you. I mean, come on, let's do stuff. it's
Yeah,
it's good to
yeah.
be in that flow of stuff. Was it? So, did you guys got any jam sessions planned?
Um, no, as I say, uh, someone recommended him in uh, I think it was 2003, um, and recorded a record pretty quickly, and released Highways in 2004, and a follow up in 2006, and then started on the album Backyards in 2008, and then the, he decided to move out to Muhammad, near this quarry lake, and so uh, uh, he the studio he designed in Southwest Champaign, there's picked up stakes, moved the studio out there, and made a studio out there, and now just we finally finished Backyards a few years ago and recorded this new record. Finally, sort of decision was made. Hey, let's move back to Champaign. So
Pack it up.
this studio he had. So he is in the process of heading back to Champaign. So
That's awesome.
we
Packing
we
it up,
have
bringing
talked
it
about.
back. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so we've talked about definitely wanting to start just set on a plan to record this in addition to any sort of projects that might have planned for Lanterna in the future. But it does say I definitely just being able to sit down with him and have him know how I work, and push me in some ways, and others is a really good thing. He was I mentioned Louis Simon, the drummer on Backyards. He and Mike Brosco were in a band called Proof of Utah, which I think
Hmm.
started somewhere in might have been Athens, Ohio, or
Oh, okay.
they were in college together somewhere. They came to Champaign, started a studio, and um, they they kind of put out a very kind of quirky kind of music. They put a couple of records out, had some European licensing and all sorts of things. So Proof of Utah was their band, and I know that they've been kind of reissuing some things, or collecting their old tapes and trying to get some things together.
That's sick. I'll have to check them out. A lot of cool stuff comes from Athens. Um,
Yes,
but awesome, man. Well, Hidden Drives comes out June 4th, right?
yes.
All right, awesome. Well, Henry, thank you so much for hanging out with me and chatting with me for like over an hour. This has been great. Um, I'm gonna hit the pause button.
Okay,
Awesome.
sounds good. Well, have a great afternoon, and thanks so much for talking.
Yeah, likewise. You too, man. All right.